Welcome to Craving the Heat, where desire takes the lead and every story leaves you wanting more. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments and keep up with our latest naughty stories. It began quietly, in the kind of way that doesn't feel like the start of anything at all. The first night he knocked, I thought it was just a passing moment, an accident, or maybe even a trick of my imagination. It was late, nearly midnight. The rain pattering softly outside, and I was curled up on the sofa with a book I hadn't really been reading. David, my husband, had long gone to bed, his soft snores drifting down the hall. The knock was gentle, hesitant, almost as if the person on the other side wasn't entirely sure they should be there. When I opened the door, it was Ethan, my stepson. He was 24 then, only a few years younger than I had been when I married. His father... He stood in the doorway with his hair damp from the mist, his hands buried deep in his jacket pockets. He gave me that small, crook smile he always carried, the one that seemed half defiant, half vulnerable. "Sorry," he said, his voice low, careful not to wake his father. "Couldn't sleep. Just needed someone to talk to. I should have sent him away. I should have told him it was late, that we could talk in the morning." But something in his eyes held me there, something restless, searching. So I stepped aside and let him in. That first night, we sat in the living room, speaking in whispers. He told me about his job, about the pressure he felt to live up to David's expectations, about the loneliness that had grown inside him since his mother's death years ago. I listened, offering the kind of comfort I thought was harmless. When he left an hour later with a soft good night and a glance that lingered just a little too long, I thought nothing of it, but then he came back the next night, and the one after that, each time, the knock grew a little more certain, a little more familiar. Our conversation stretched deeper about life, about regrets, about the things we both carried but never spoke aloud. We would sit close on the couch, the space between us shrinking until I could feel the heat of his arm against mine. Sometimes the silence between us was heavier than the words, charged with something I didn't dare name. I began to look forward to it. I would sit in the living room with the lights dimmed, pretending to read, waiting for the soft rap on the door that meant he was there. I told myself it was innocent, that he was just lonely, that I was just filling a void as father. Couldn't, but deep down I knew the truth. One night, the rain was coming down harder than usual, streaking the windows like silver threads. Ethan arrived drenched, his shirt clinging to him. I handed him a towel, scolding him lightly for not bringing an umbrella, and when his fingers brushed mine, it felt like fire. He didn't pull away. Neither did I. We sat on the couch again. Our voices low, but that night he didn't talk much. He just watched me. His eyes traced my face, my hands, a line of my shoulders. I felt myself burning beneath the weight of it, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure he could hear it, and then, without a word, he leaned in. The kiss was tentative at first, a question unspoken, but when I didn't push him away, it deepened. My body betrayed me, responding with a hunger I hadn't felt in years. When we finally broke apart, breathless, I whispered the words I shouldn't have. "We can't." But his reply was simple. "Then why does it feel like we were meant to?" From that night on, everything changed. His knocks were no longer about conversation, they were about us. We became reckless, stealing time in the quiet hours while David slept just rooms away. His lips, his hands, his voice murmuring my name, it all became a secret I lived for. The guilt gnawed at me during the day. I would sit across from David at breakfast, nodding as he spoke about his meetings, his plans, his trust in me. And all the while, I carried Ethan's touch still burning on my skin. But no matter how heavy the shame grew, it could never outweigh the pull I felt toward him. There was a night one I'll never forget when I told him to stop coming, that it had gone too far, that we had crossed a line we could never uncross. He looked at me with such devastation that it nearly shattered me. And then, softly, he said, "You can tell me to stop, but you can't tell me you don't love me." He was right. I couldn't, so he kept knocking. And every time I let him. And we built a world inside those stolen nights, a world that existed only for us. Sometimes it was tender, sometimes desperate, sometimes filled with laughter that we smothered against each other's skin so the house wouldn't wake. I knew it couldn't last, that one day the truth would rise and burn us both. But when he held me, when his lips brushed against my ear and he whispered that he'd never stop choosing me, I believed in something larger than the consequences. He knocked on my door every night until I fell in love. And when I did, I fell so completely that there was no turning back. The nights became a rhythm, almost a song my heart knew by instinct. The faint creak of the hallway, the soft knock on the door, the way the air seemed to thicken just before I opened it and found him standing there. Sometimes his eyes were tired, heavy with whatever weight he carried during the day. Sometimes there was a spark in them, an urgency that left me breathless before he even spoke a word. I lived for those moments. At first, I thought I was in control, that I could end it whenever I wanted. I told myself I could draw the line, push him away before we sank too deep. But each time he came back, my resolve broke a little more until there was nothing left to guard. I began to wait for him deliberately. I'd linger on the sofa long after David had gone to bed, book open but unread, listening for the sound of Ethan's footsteps. When the hours grew late and the knock didn't come, I felt a hollow ache, a disappointment that bordered on despair. He started staying longer, sometimes until the first pale light of dawn began seeping through the curtains. We would fall asleep, on the couch, tangled in each other's arms, only to wake with panic when the house stirred and the day intruded. I'd slip away into the kitchen, putting on the kettle as though nothing had happened, while he climbed the stairs to his room. Before his father rose, it was dangerous, and we both knew it. But that danger only seemed to make everything sharper. The way his hand would find mine beneath the blanket when we watched movies in the quiet, the way his breath caught when I leaned too close, the way our bodies found each other like we'd been waiting our whole lives for this kind of fire. There was no space for hesitation anymore. The guilt pressed down on me harder with each passing day. David's trust was simple, absolute. He believed in me without question. He would smile at me across the table, his eyes soft, and I would feel a knife twist in my chest. Ethan noticed it too. More than once, I tried to tell him it had to stop, that what we were doing would destroy everything if it ever came to light. But Ethan's voice, low and steady, always pulled me back. "We're not destroying anything," he whispered one night when I trembled in his arms. "We're just finally living." His words became a lifeline I clung to. I told myself it wasn't betrayal, not when what I had with David had grown so cold, so distant. What Ethan gave me wasn't a replacement. It was something altogether new, raw, and uncontainable. When his lips touched mine, I felt young again, alive in a way I hadn't in years. When his hands held my face, I felt seen, cherished, wanted, but secrets have a way of growing heavier the longer they're carried. There were close calls moments when David almost walked in at the wrong time, moments when Ethan's gaze lingered on me too long during family dinners. The silence in those moments was suffocating, each of us holding our breath, praying nothing slipped. Yet afterward, when the danger had passed, the relief always carried us straight back into each other's arms. There was a night when a storm rolled in, the rain lashing against the windows, thunder cracking across the sky. I sat on the couch, knees pulled to my chest, waiting for him. The storm had knocked the power out, and the house was cloaked in darkness. When the knock finally came, it startled me. But when I opened the door and saw him standing there, dripping wet and shivering, all I felt was relief. We didn't speak much that night. We didn't need to. The storm outside seemed to echo everything between us, wild, uncontrollable, electric. He kissed me like it was the only thing tethering him to the earth, and I kissed him back like I'd been starving for years. When he whispered my name against my skin, it wasn't just passion. It was a confession, a promise, a surrender. After that, there was no going back. I stopped pretending I could resist him. He stopped pretending he came to my door just to talk. We both knew what we were to each other, and we both chose it, again and again, even with the risk looming over a stop. But sometimes, when the morning came and the world felt too bright, I would watch him slip away and wonder how long we could keep living inside this fragile secret. How long before the knocking stopped, before the truth burst free and shattered everything we had built in the quiet hours of the night. The storm that night never really left me. Even after the skies cleared, the echo of thunder lingered in my chest, the feel of Ethan's lips still on mine long after he had slipped away to his room. I lay awake until the early hours, staring at the ceiling, wondering how I had let myself cross a line that could never be uncrossed. But then I thought of him, the way his eyes softened when he looked at me, the way he whispered my name like it meant everything. And I knew I would open that door again tomorrow night. The routine deepened. I became reckless in ways I never imagined myself capable of. I started leaving the door unlocked, trusting he would come, needing him to come. Sometimes he would wait until the whole house was silent before entering, moving through the shadows until he found me. Other nights, he knocked softly, and my heart jumped as though I'd been waiting for the sound all evening. The anticipation itself became intoxicating during the day. Everything carried on as though nothing had changed. David would kiss my forehead before heading off to work, and I would smile and wave him out the door, my heart pounding because only hours before I had been in Ethan's arms. I cooked dinners, folded laundry, and kept the house running, but beneath it all was a restless energy I couldn't contain. My skin hummed with memory. My lips felt bruised from his dot. There were times when I thought I saw suspicion flicker across David's face. Once, after dinner, he looked at me for a long moment and said, "You've been glowing lately. Happier. Did something change?" The guilt rushed through me like ice water, but I forced a smile, telling him I'd just been sleeping. "Better." He accepted it, and part of me hated myself for how easily I lied. Ethan was different in those moments. He didn't seem to feel guilt the way I did. When I whispered fears about being caught, about what this would do if David ever found out, Ethan would hold my chin and make me look at him. "Stop thinking about him when you're with me." He'd say, "This is ours. No one else's." His certainty both terrified and thrilled me. One night, the house was unusually quiet. David had gone away on a business trip, leaving Ethan and me alone under the same roof. There was no need for knocks, no need for secrecy. He came into my room openly, his footsteps bold, his breath ragged when he reached me. The freedom of it was overwhelming. We didn't whisper that night. We didn't listen for creaks on the stairs or shadows in the hallway. We let go completely. The silence outside only made what we shared feel louder, more dangerous, more unforgettable. But the next morning, reality returned with the sound of David's voice over the phone, telling me he'd be home soon and that he missed me. I glanced at Ethan across the kitchen table as I spoke, his eyes locked on mine, a faint smirk tugging at his lips, as though he already knew I would never stop choosing him. The tension grew thicker with time. Every shared meal, every casual family moment became a stage we had to perform on, careful not to let anything slip. Sometimes Ethan brushed past me in the hallway, his hand grazing mine for only a second, but the electricity of it stayed with me for hours. At night, when we finally collided behind closed doors, the hunger was almost unbearable. We kissed, like people who had been starved, who didn't know if tomorrow would ever give them the same chance again. Still, cracks began to show. David noticed when Ethan started spending more time at home instead of going out with friends. He noticed when I seemed distracted during conversations. My thoughts pulled elsewhere. One evening, David mentioned it casually, "You and Ethan seem closer lately," and I nearly dropped the glass in my hand. I laughed it off, saying it was just the natural bond of sharing a house, but deep down I felt the first real tremor of fear. That fear didn't stop me. If anything, it made me cling to Ethan harder. Each night felt borrowed, as though time itself was conspiring to tear us apart. He knew it too. I could feel it in the way he held me, tighter, longer, as though letting go would mean losing me forever. There was a night when he didn't come. I waited, restless and anxious, my ears straining for the sound of his knock. Hours passed. I paced the living room, glancing at the clock again and again, until finally I gave up and went upstairs. But when I passed his door, I saw the faint glow of light beneath it. I hesitated, then gently pushed it open. He was sitting at his desk, head in his hands, as though carrying a weight too heavy to share. When he looked up, his eyes were wet, his expression raw. "We can't keep doing this," he said hoarsely. The words struck like a blade, but I crossed the room and knelt beside him, taking his face in my hands. I kissed him before he could speak again, pouring every ounce of need and desperation into it. His resistance crumbled almost instantly, his arms pulling me into him, his breath breaking as though he had tried and failed to convince himself of something he didn't believe. Afterward, when we lay together in the silence of his room, he whispered against my hair, "If this ends, it won't be because I stopped loving you." His words sank into me like a brand, and I clung to them, knowing they would haunt me forever. The nights went on. The knocks returned. And though every step deeper into this love felt like walking closer to the edge of a cliff, I couldn't stop myself. Ethan had become the pulse in my veins, the breath in my lungs, the secret I both feared and lived for. Days blended into nights, and nights bled into mornings with the same dangerous rhythm. What had once been stolen moments at the edge of fear became something I craved like oxygen. Every day, while David carried on with the life he thought we all shared, Ethan and I drifted further into a reality of our own making. It wasn't just lust anymore, it was the way his presence anchored me, the way his eyes made me feel visible in a world that had long overlooked me. But guilt was a quiet shadow that followed me everywhere. I felt it when David brushed a stray strand of hair from my face, when he reached for my hand at dinner, when he kissed me goodnight with the same steady affection he'd always shown. I should have felt safe in that, grateful. Instead, I felt hollow because my heart wasn't with him anymore. My heart beat in sync with Ethan's, in secret behind closed doors, where no one else could see. The danger of being discovered only sharpened the intensity between us. One afternoon, while David napped on the couch after a long day at work, Ethan pulled me into the kitchen. He pressed me against the counter, his lips finding mine in a kiss that made my knees weak, while only a wall separated us from the man who trusted me most. Every sound from the living room made my pulse spike, but I didn't stop him. I couldn't. It was as if some force beyond reason had claimed me, and resisting was no longer an option. I told myself we were careful, that no one suspected. But the truth was, cracks had begun to show. David was no fool. He saw the way Ethan lingered near me, how our eyes seemed to find each other too easily. He asked questions with subtle edges. "You two seem close these days," or "What were you talking about just now?" And though I laughed and dismissed them, the weight of his suspicion pressed harder each time. There was a night when David was away on another trip, and Ethan and I let ourselves forget the world entirely. We cooked dinner together, laughed without restraint, and danced in the kitchen with the music turned low. It was ordinary in so many ways, but in those moments it felt like the truest form of love I had ever known. Later, in bed, he held me with such tenderness that tears burned my eyes. I realized then that this wasn't just an affair, it was something deeper. Something I could never easily let go of, no matter the cost. The cost began to surface one morning. David came home earlier than expected and walked into the kitchen, just as Ethan leaned too close to whisper something in my ear. It was nothing to comment about the coffee being too strong, but the sight of it froze David in the doorway. His eyes flickered between us, narrowing slightly, and for a heartbeat I thought everything was about to shatter. Ethan pulled away quickly, his jaw tight, and I forced to smile as if nothing was wrong. David didn't say anything in that moment, but the look he gave me stayed with me long after. After that, I noticed the way David watched us more carefully. He asked Ethan about his plans, his friends, his time away from the house. He asked me about mine too, his tone light but his eyes sharp, searching for cracks in the stories I told. I found myself lying more easily, slipping half-truths into conversations that once would have been effortless honesty. I hated what I was becoming, yet the thought of letting Ethan go was unbearable. One evening, when David was working late, Ethan came to me with a heaviness in his voice I hadn't heard before. He sat on the edge of my bed, running a hand through his hair, his eyes stormy. "We can't keep hiding like this," he said. "It's only a matter of time before he finds out." His words struck me with a fear I couldn't disguise. But then he reached for me, his hands trembling, and added, "I don't care if he does. I can't pretend I don't love you." My breath caught, because hearing it said aloud made it real, in a way I had been avoiding. I whispered it back, my voice breaking, and when he kissed me, it was with the certainty of someone who had already chosen, even if it meant walking through fire. The fire wasn't far. A week later, David confronted me. He didn't accuse, not outright. Instead, he stood in the kitchen with his arms crossed and asked, "Is there something you want to tell me?" His tone was calm, but the weight behind the question was suffocating. My heart raced, my throat dry, but I shook my head and forced a smile. "No, of course not." He studied me for a long time before nodding slowly, but I could see it in his eyes. He didn't believe me. That night, when Ethan knocked softly at my door, I let him in with trembling hands. The fear of losing everything only made me hold him tighter, my body pressed desperately against his, as if I could fuse us together and silence the world outside. We didn't speak much. We didn't need to. Every kiss, every touch was a declaration, a vow we didn't dare put into words. The guilt, the lies, the fear, they should have driven me away, but instead they pulled me deeper into him. I knew the path we were on could only end in ruin, but I also knew I couldn't turn back. Ethan wasn't just a secret anymore. He was the part of me I had been missing, the fire I couldn't extinguish, no matter how dangerous the flames grew. The night after David's quiet confrontation, I couldn't sleep. His question lingered in my mind like smoke, thick and suffocating. I lay beside him in the dark, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing, wondering if he was truly asleep or just pretending the way I sometimes did. My body was next to his, but my soul felt miles away. Every thought, every beat of my heart, every ache in my chest, everything belonged to Ethan. When the clock struck midnight, I heard it, the softest knock at my bedroom door. It was dangerous, reckless, beyond foolish to let him in with David lying only a few feet away. Yet my body moved before reason could stop me. I slipped out of bed quietly, my bare feet silent against the floor, and opened the door just wide, enough to let Ethan slide in. His eyes were wild, desperate, the kind of desperation that matched my own. He didn't speak, and neither did I. We didn't need words. He pressed me back against the wall, his mouth finding mine in a kiss that was fire and salvation all at once. My hands gripped his shoulders as though letting go would kill me. Every touch was urgent, every movement tinged with fear of being caught, and that fear only made our love burn hotter. He lifted me into his arms, holding me like I was the only thing in his world, carrying me deeper into the darkness, as if trying to hide me from everything that could tear us apart. We should have stopped, but the truth was, stopping had never been an option. His lips traced the curve of my neck, and I buried my face in his shoulder, stifling the sounds of my need. My whole body trembled against him, not from fear, but from the intensity of the love that bound us. There wasn't just passion. Though the passion consumed us, it was the way his touch spoke what we couldn't say aloud, the way he worshipped me as though I was more than flesh and bone. He made me feel alive, truly alive, in a way I had never felt before. When he finally pulled back, breathless, his forehead pressed against mine, his voice was low and shaking. "I can't keep pretending you're not mine," he whispered. The words sent a shiver through me, both terrifying and thrilling. I kissed him again, harder, pouring into that kiss every secret, every longing, every confession I couldn't say with words after he left that night. Slipping out silently before dawn, I returned to bed beside David, My husband's warmth was steady, familiar, safe, and yet it felt like I was lying next to a stranger. My heart ached with guilt, but my body still hummed with Ethan's touch, with the memory of his lips and the heat of his skin. I lay awake until morning, torn between the life I had built and the life I secretly craved. The days that followed were a blur of stolen glances, hidden touches, and impossible longing. Ethan and I moved like shadows in the house, careful but reckless at the same time. Sometimes he'd brush past me in the hallway, his hand grazing mine just long enough to send sparks through me. Other times, he'd find me in the kitchen when David wasn't home, his lips claiming mine before I could even breathe. Every encounter left me weaker against him, every secret moment binding us tighter in a love that should have never existed. But what terrified me most was that it wasn't just lust anymore. It was love, raw and undeniable. I found myself dreaming about him at night, imagining a world where we didn't have to hide, where I could hold his hand in the sunlight instead of the shadows. I wanted a future with him, even though the very thought of it was madness. One night, when David was away on another trip, Ethan came to me openly, without hesitation. He didn't knock softly this time. His knock was firm, demanding, and when I opened the door, he didn't wait. He pulled me into his arms and kissed me like he had been starving. We stumbled to the bed, laughter tangled with hunger, and when we fell together, it felt like surrender. Every kiss was slower that night, deeper. He took his time with me, as though memorizing every part of me, as though he knew this moment might be the only one we would ever truly have without fear. He whispered my name again and again, his hands gentle, his eyes burning with something that made my chest ache. It wasn't just passion, it was devotion. He loved me, and I loved him more than I'd ever loved anyone in my life. When it was over, we lay tangled in each other, the world outside silent and forgotten. His hand traced circles on my skin, and I pressed my face to his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "What are we going to do?" I asked quietly, the weight of reality creeping back in. He kissed the top of my head and whispered, "Whatever it takes." And in that moment, I believed him.